I think he got his passion for design probably with a lot of his stuff through the motorcycles. He was very much into motorcycles. He built his first motorcycle when he was probably 10 or 11. When you're into the motorcycles, you're constantly trying to do things as simply as you can and remove extras. Particularly he was, because he understood that the road to speed, was clean, dependable power. But at the same time, if you can reduce weight, you're going to gain it back in speed. And he studied structure, he studied nature, and he made countless model airplanes when he was a kid. He made probably many hundreds. And the table in the dining room is all full of pin dots. And the cut lines. But he felt that making the model airplanes probably taught him more about strength engineering and lightweight than anything else. But he really wanted to build boats. So he had started a boat, Joie de Vivre, and she was about a 30-foot little boat, and he was doing it for a guy, I think, Jim Clark, not the Jim Clark around here, but a Clark who was out on the end of Long Island, and he was very much into racing cars and had a small car museum. He was a big starboat sailor. But he, as the boat was coming along, he decided that he was going to do something else, so he declined to take it. And my dad had met a guy up there, Al Meyer, and Al Meyer was a boat broker and a very, very successful racing sailor. And Al Meyer, he said, well, okay, and he actually went out and found somebody who was looking for a boat, and he sold him that boat. So then my dad had to finish the boat. And as he was finishing the boat, Al Meyer ran into another fellow who was also looking for a boat, and people really trusted Al Meyer a lot, and he was a very fast sailor, so they knew that if this guy could really win races, that he knew what fast boats were. So, and he brought him in to see my dad about my dad designing a boat for him, and that was a guy named John Case. Okay, so in that discussion, after a bit of that discussion, he basically, the two of them one day were in a conversation one evening about the boat, and he wanted a boat quite like the boat he had built, but he wanted a canoe sterned boat. He didn't want a normal transom boat. So he, in the conversation, Dad, I think, blurted out that, someday he'd love to have a boatyard. And then John Case said, yeah, I'd love to have a boatyard too, but I can't put the time in to manage it. Dad said, well, I can't afford it. John said, well, I can afford it. That's no problem.
Oh, nice.
And then the two of them formed a partnership that was a beautiful and very successful partnership right up until the day they ended it. And the real telling point was that even after we had completely bought out Mr. Case, my dad and Mr. Case could still be found on the phone at various times talking. Which was a beautiful thing. Yeah. He liked to do things artistically. He was very artistic. So whatever it was he was doing, forming, making, it was usually done very nicely, worked well. And when we look at and maintain these boats that he did, quite frankly, we've got them out here 45 years, and they're beautiful little boats, and they were lightly built, and they sail fast, and they've had their repairs and their maintenance, but most of them have not had any what I would call extremely major repairs.
Boy, that says a lot.
But the customers would probably tell you differently, according to Mike's invoicing over there. But in all honesty, they haven't had their keels replaced and stuff like that. Occasionally a frame or something, but for the most part, they've held up really nicely for what they are. And they're light and they're strong and they're fast. Young kids, we worked with them, and when we were very young, it was always extremely interesting because, for instance, he held several patents. One was a patent for a steam engine, prime mover. And he figured out how to externally how to keep the steam and the condensate in an internal closed hermetic sealed arrangement, and then fire this engine. So theoretically, it should work. And we designed it. He designed it primarily, and we all worked on it. He and myself and one of our customers. We had a customer then we had built a boat for, was named Adolf Egli. And Adolf Egli, he was an Austrian mathematician who wrote the Westinghouse steam tables. And he also had then left Westinghouse and was the head of Ford Aerospace Research and Development. So as a result, my dad started talking to Adolf about some of the attributes of steam when it gets into very superheated modes, which is an interesting area because there's a thing called entropy that occurs, and entropy is when a physical matter changes state but then begins to pick up other properties. And that water is classic at that because it can go from frozen to liquid to steam, and then once it's in the steam state, it can continue to take on more and more and more and carry power in a superheated form. So it's really quite astounding. At the time, we were in the 70s, fuel was going through the roof, pollution problems were, because the country still had a lot of industrial work going on, we had pollutions, and people were looking at ways to produce rotary power with a lot cleaner, less pollution. And one day in that living room, I remember I was in there, my dad was in there, Adolf Egli was in there, Bill Lear, who had originally formed Motorola and then formed the Learjet Company, was in there because he was also looking at doing steam for steam buses on the West Coast. And there were articles, large articles about Lear's moving into the steam buses and steam-driven stuff. So we were all, from different ends and different ways of looking at things, trying to have a little mini think tank in there to figure out, where we were going to go. But as kids, I would come home on the school bus and do my homework if I was going to do it. And then basically we'd go out inside till we had a little machine shop over there. We still do. And I'd go in there with him and we'd figure out what we were going to machine. And I'd be machining until 11:30 at night, and then I'd go to bed. Then the next day I'd get up and go to school and come home, and that went on for like almost 2 years. And the way my dad was and the way we grew up, there was not a lot of discipline in a regimental style of discipline that would be applicable to good business practices and good study habits. And my dad did not like school. He was not a person that thought about school, although he was extremely smart, but he felt that people should ponder and explore and think and consider and come to their own conclusions and then prove them out. But he also had a mind that could visualize things and did visualize things. So he did not think in numbers and characters of print. He thought in actual pictures, and he could take things in his head that he hadn't yet taken a pencil and put to paper, and he could revolve that and look at it and examine it and see it. And I asked him one time, Dad, how do you come up with the way this is going to look and that? And he says, I can see this boat sailing. I see it sailing. For me, it's just a matter of taking the pencil and filling in the lines. Well, through time, I practiced that a lot, and I've developed a fair bit of it myself. So when you do that, you develop these arts. But the problem is like, for instance, you get really fast at sketching. So, here's a manifold that I sketched for one of my guys. Real quick. Here's how I want this to be. Do this like this, do this. Well, the guy went off, ordered all the parts, and this is assembled and getting ready to go into place. But this was never been documented in a disciplined drawing in the manifold folder so that somebody 2 years from now can open that up, and look at it and see what a manifold, how we would manifold something, and it should be. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but what I'm getting at is the lack of that disciplinary habit causes us difficulty, and of course is incongruent to school studies.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it's very frustrating. In a long discussion with our dad one time, we decided to discuss classic. And he was like this. I mean, you'd sit down and start talking about, okay, what is a classic? What makes something classic? And the final conclusion was that if you add to it, you destroy it, or if you take away from it, you destroy it. It's